What's the best budget lens for a beginner? What about macro photography? How do you do night photography? And should I clean my camera sensor? These are just some of the questions that you've asked and I'm going to answer in this video, so stick around. Hi, Paul here from Photogenius. Now, just over a week ago, I invited the YouTube community to ask me any camera or photography related questions that I would then go on to answer in a video. And today's that day. Now, if you're new to this channel, I post regular videos, tutorials, I share tips, tricks, do occasional gear reviews, all with one thing in mind, and that is to help you take better photos with a digital camera. So please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, over 50 people replied to the requests. I've got a heap of questions to go through, so this may end up being quite a lengthy video. So let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it. Now, I'm going to need my glasses for this one, and starting off we have a question from Alexander Acuna, who's got a Nikon D4400. Now he's struggling with auto, would like tips on getting out of the habit of just shooting auto. So look, if you're a regular viewer, you'll know that I like to encourage people to get off of auto and use your camera manually. Using the camera manually means that you have more creative control over your camera, and you can adjust and change things, like you can be selective about the focusing, you can adjust your exposure, make your picture brighter, darker, and so on. Now, if you're a beginner, full manual can be quite daunting. So, Alexandra, I recommend trying the program mode. Now, on the top of a camera, there will be a dial. If you turn it round to the letter P, this is program. Now, this is very similar to auto in that the camera will select mostly a aperture, shutter speed and ISO that will work for you. But unlike auto, where you have no degree of control, you will be able to change with the dials things like ISO, aperture and shutter speed. Now, this is a big step up from auto and definitely something I recommend. Now, in the future, I'm going to do a video just about the program mode, but in the meantime, give it a go. Put your camera into program, have a little play around with it, and you'll see that you've got a bit more control. You'll be able to change things like focus points. You'll be able to do a whole lot more. So, not a big fan of auto. Hope that helps. Let's move on to the next question. George has said, how can you take better photos during the night? So, nighttime photography, how to take photos at night when it's dark or in low light is a question I get asked all the time. So again, coming soon, I'm going to do a dedicated video about night photography. But in the meantime, here's some tips. The best way to take photos at night is not to rely on things like flash. Shutter speed is the key. Your camera has a shutter inside of it. When it opens, it lets light into the camera. And at night time, the best and most effective way of taking a good photo is to leave that shutter open longer, so you let more light into the camera. This is often referred to as doing a long exposure. So if you're new to using your camera or manual's not for you, a good mode to try this out might be the shutter priority mode. Now, if you've got a Nikon or a Sony, this will be S on the camera dial. If you've got a Canon, this will be TV. It's still shutter priority, but they refer to it as time value. Now, what you can do here is change the shutter speed, but the camera helps you out by setting some of the other functions like the aperture, for example. Now, on most cameras, when you set the camera to shutter priority, you dial to the left with the dial and you'll see your shutter speed changing. Now, when you get to a number that is followed by a quotation mark, that means that you are getting into actual seconds. So for example, if you see the number 1 followed by a quotation mark, that is a shutter speed of 1 second. If you see 10 followed by a quotation mark, that is 10 seconds. And the longer the shutter's open, the more light you'll get into your camera. So this might be a mode to just start you off. So my recommendation is get your camera on a tripod. Set it into shutter priority, play around with the slower shutter speeds. See how you go with that one. But in the meantime, keep an eye on this channel because there is a nighttime video coming very, very soon. Thanks for your question. So the next question comes from DCCD, who asks about sensor cleaning, which is a question I get asked quite a lot. How often should the sensor be cleaned? Should the camera be taken to the professionals if someone has never done it? Well, look, inside your camera is a sensor. If I pop the lens off the front of this Nikon here and hold it out, hopefully you'll see the sensor. It can get dusty. How often do you clean it? I guess depends on how often you're using the camera and you're changing lenses. If you're using your camera quite a bit, maybe once a year or maybe once every 6 months if you're using your camera quite a lot. You'll know when it's time because you'll notice some dust spots and little marks on your images. Do I do it myself? Personally, no. You can buy sensor cleaning kits. I've heard they're fine, and if you follow the instructions, I'm sure you'll be fine with it, but personally it makes me a bit nervous when it comes to cleaning the sensor, so I send it off somewhere to be done. I'm lucky because there's a couple of places in Brisbane that can do it, and I'll put some details in the description below the video if you do live in Queensland or Brisbane. So to answer your question, how often should you clean it? Depends how often you use it, and should you do it yourself? I wouldn't. So hopefully there's someone near you that can do it. Okay, moving on to the next question. Football Creation, great name. How to do macro photography? Well, I don't know if I can completely answer this one in this video, but if you like doing macro photography and if you're not sure what that term means, it means getting close to a subject or photographing things that are very small. So typically maybe bugs, flowers and that kind of thing. There's a couple of ways you can approach this. A standard lens, you can get fairly close to your subject, but it won't give you the clarity that a macro lens will give you. So one way of doing macro photography is of course to save up and buy a macro lens, and you can buy some budget macro lenses for about $300 or $400 here in Australia. I'm not sure how much that would be in your currency, of course. But to be fair, the really good macro lenses cost 2 or 3 times that. An alternative, and something that I've explored recently in a couple of videos, is to use what are called extension tubes. I'm going to go and grab these actually. Hold on. Okay, so these are extension tubes. These ones are for Nikon, these ones are for Canon. These are made by a company called Kenko, so they have different mounts to suit different cameras. And what these do is they effectively extend the focal length of your lens. So this is a set of 3, and if I pop it off like so, I can show you what it is. So it looks a bit like a small lens, but there's actually no glass in it. So what you do is you pop your lens off your camera, you pop this on first, then you pop your lens back on, thus making your lens longer, hence the term extension tube. Now what an extension tube does is it actually extends the focal length of the lens, which effectively magnifies the subject on the sensor. So if you're taking a picture of an ant with a extension tube added, that ant will be bigger on the sensor, which should give you better detail. So the good news is extension tubes are actually pretty cheap. So this is a really good budget way of getting into macro photography. I've done a video on this. I'll put a link up here and below the video so you can check it out. And I'm doing another macro video very, very soon. So watch out for that. So I hope that answers your question. So the next question comes from Andrew Bootles, who asks, "Hi Paul, what is the best settings to use to photograph a moving object? Train, plane, car, clearly at night, Andy." Okay, Andy, tricky one this one, because if you want a moving subject to be captured clearly, generally you want to use a fast shutter speed because you want the shutter to open and close quickly and freeze the movement of the object. The problem is at night time you tend to do the opposite. You tend to use a slower shutter speed to let more light in. So here's the way around this. You're going to need to use the faster shutter speed to freeze the movement. How fast depends on how fast the subject is moving, so you'll have to play around with different shutter speeds here. Then to make up for the lack of light, you can only do 2 things. You can open your aperture as wide as possible within the lens, and this is the lower f number. And the other thing you can do, and this is probably the thing that's going to solve the issue, is to increase the ISO on your camera. Now increasing the ISO will effectively make your image brighter, which is good news. But unfortunately with ISO, the higher the ISO, the more grainy your image will look because of something called digital noise. Now for this you might want to try shutter priority because you can lock in the fast shutter speed, camera looks after the aperture, and you can play around with the ISO. Hope that one helps. Moving on to the next question, Qual 831 says, "I have a Nikon D4400, a popular camera, and I've been taking night videos. I'm having an issue where the sky has a lot of noise, but the rest of the video is clean. Do you have any suggestions?" Well, look, digital noise is always going to be an issue when you're using a higher ISO. Now, I don't know anything about what camera modes you're using, But whether it's in auto or manual, you're using a high ISO, that's where the digital noise is coming from. And it does tend to be more noticeable in the shadows and dark areas. And you said you noticed the digital noise in the sky. Obviously the sky is very dark. So the solution here is to find a way of reducing the ISO. It's the only way. And that may mean completely changing your other settings like your aperture and your shutter. To be honest, it's quite tricky with video when you shoot at night time, and using a lens with a really wide aperture may be a better way to go. So look at lenses that are out there that you can buy, maybe at a budget with a wide aperture. That's a lower F number. One that springs to mind is the Nifty 50. We'll be talking about that a bit later on. Okay, on to the next question, and Nelson L08. I'm looking to start shooting some portraits. I've mostly done sports photography. I'm looking at some prime 85mm lenses. Is it worth spending twice the money to get f1.4 over f1.8? So lenses have an aperture built into them. This aperture allows you to control the light. The lower the F number, the wider the aperture, and the greater the depth of field, which is a blurry background. So typically a lot of people that do portrait photography like lenses that have wide apertures. Now, the difference between 1.4 and 1.8, well, a 1.8 aperture lens will be a lot cheaper, which is good. Generally, they're really good value for money and they will give you a nice blurry background. But of course, a 1.4 aperture lens will cost significantly more and will give you more blur. If your budget stretches to it, get the 1.4. It's going to have better quality glass, it's going to be a better built lens, you're going to have better blur, and really I think that's where you need to invest. Lenses is where you need to invest more than camera bodies. You won't regret it, because if you do upgrade your camera body later on, you can still use that lens on a future body. So look, if you're on a budget, go for the 1.8 aperture lens. If you've got a little bit of money to spend, just go for it. The 1.4 lens is a lens that you won't regret buying. Okay, on to the next one. Red Raider Rallyfan Productions, another great name. I have a Canon Rebel T6. Recently I've been experimenting with exposures at night time. What's the best way to tell if the subject is in focus? Well, taking photos at night is a lot of fun, but focusing can be tricky because the camera struggles to see the subject, and sometimes you'll find that the camera can't focus on that subject. So a good way of doing this is to use the live view and set your camera's focus to manual. What you can do then is you can magnify the live view by using what is called digital zoom, and then you just adjust the focus yourself. Now this is a really good solution that a lot of astrophotographers use, and if I'm shooting at night and I'm not using autofocus because it's struggling, this is the solution. Again, it's called digital zoom. It's a feature found in the live view, which most cameras have now. I've done a video on this, so I'll put some details in the links below the video so you can go and check that out. But that's going to solve your problem, definitely. Okay, next one. Samir Patel says, use of ND filter and how to choose the right number of ND filter. Okay, quick explanation of what an ND filter is. ND filter, neutral density filter. Neutral because it's a neutral color, D because it's dense and therefore dark, and it's a way of slowing light. A filter is a piece of glass you put on the front of the lens, and an ND filter really is designed just to hold or slow the light down, so or hold some light back if you like. Often used with landscape photographers or people that want to do long exposures during the day, and typically the bigger the number, the denser and more dark the ND filter is. So which ND filter to use really depends largely on what you want to do. Do you want to slow just a bit of light down? Do you want to really slow things down and use slow shutter speeds? If you do, you want to go for a really big ND number. I'm actually testing out some ND filters at the moment for a company called Polar Pro. I'm going to be doing a review video in the next couple of weeks, so look out for that one. Okay, moving on. I'm not great with the pronunciations of the name, but I'll try my best. Munwama Sherlock asks, what lens do you suggest for landscape photography? I'm using a Nikon D4500 with only the kit lens. So I'm assuming your kit lens is the 18 to 55mm lens. 18mm will give you a reasonably wide view. 55mm will allow you to zoom in a bit. I guess the answer to your question is really depending on what you think you're missing out on. With landscape photography, a lot of people want a wider view. So you're going to want something with a lower number, maybe something like a 10 to 20 millimeter lens. Sigma, which is a company that make lenses that fit other cameras, do a really good 10 to 20 millimeter lens that's worth checking out. It will work on your D4500. I'll put details in the description below so you can check that one out. Failing that, of course, Nikon will also make one, but it's going to be a lot more money. If you want to get closer to your subject, then you need a telephoto lens. So something like the 55 to 300 millimeter lens will be better. Most people, when they think of landscape photography, tend to naturally think of wide views, so therefore a lower focal length. But actually, a lot of landscape photographers like to use longer lenses as a way of compressing the perspective and picking out details within a landscape rather than going for the whole sort of panorama type effect, you know, a really wide view. Someone that I love, a great YouTuber who uses telephoto lenses a lot when he's doing landscape photography, is Thomas Heaton. He's an amazing YouTuber. I love his work. He's a great photographer, and I'll put details on his channel again in the links below the video so you can check him out. But yeah, look, you're either looking for a wide or a telephoto lens. Okay, on to the next question. This comes from Jill. Hi, do you think the entry-level cameras like the Nikon D4500 or Canon 2000D are still better than the high-end camera phones like Samsung, iPhone XS? Yes, absolutely. With an iPhone, with a smartphone, your sensor inside those devices is incredibly small. This means that during the day when the light is good, you'll get amazing photos with them, to be fair, but you won't get the resolution that you will get in the bigger cameras. That's just the way it is. Also at night time, you will see that iPhones, smartphones really struggle. You will get a lot of digital noise. Your pictures will look really, really grainy. But with cameras like these, with the bigger sensor, you'll get less grain, less digital noise. And the bigger the sensor, the better the image. So look, I'm an iPhone user. I'm a big fan of my iPhone. I take photos with my iPhone almost daily. I even run iPhone photography courses here in Brisbane. So I'm not saying you can't take good photos on a smartphone, but you asked the question, these types of cameras will outdo your smartphone, definitely. Moving on to the next one, the photography channel. I'm not able to connect my D3500 to phone as an external monitor. Please help. I don't believe you can, to be honest. You can download the SnapBridge app. You can then use Bluetooth connectivity to connect the app to your D3500. This will allow you to use the smartphone remotely to take photos, but it won't give you a live view on the phone yourself. So there is no way of getting a live view or a live feed from the D3500 to your smartphone. I'm sorry about that. If you've got a Nikon camera that has Wi-Fi, then you can use the app and you do get a live feed from the screen. But unfortunately, the D3500 doesn't have Wi-Fi, it has Bluetooth. Okay, sorry about that one. Next question from Justin, which we've already covered. How to clean off sensor dust. We've already talked about that one, so moving on. Saref Gopal says, hi Paul, please suggest best zoom lenses, budget range. Okay, so a zoom lens or a telephoto lens is the perfect lens if you like maybe doing sports photography or wildlife photography. So it's a longer lens that will get you closer to the subject. 100mm, 200mm, 300mm. The bigger the number, the closer your subject will be. Now it doesn't, you don't say what camera you've got. So I'm going to suggest a lens for the Canon and the Nikon. Let's just assume that you're using one of these two cameras. So if you've got a Nikon camera, the Nikon AFP 70 to 300mm lens is pretty good value for money. Here in Australia, it's around about the $400 mark, and it has vibration reduction built into it, which is really handy. If you've got a Canon camera, then look at the 55 to 200mm telephoto lens, which has image stabilization. Image stabilization in Canon lenses, and vibration reduction in Nikon lenses. These are good features that are well worth the extra money because it helps to stabilize the glass and keep your image steady, which is something that's quite tricky when you're using telephoto lenses. The Canon lens about $499 here in Australia. So I hope that helps. On to the next question. Ashwin MR says, kindly do a video regarding entry-level cameras with prime lenses versus pro camera with kit lenses and vice versa. Again, not a question, more of a request, so I'll see what I can do for that. MZ, I am a beginner and I have a Canon 70D. Which basic lens should I start? The one lens I'm using, the focal ring doesn't work. So you've got a lens that doesn't work. So look, I would probably look at the 18 to 55mm kit lens. It is a really good value lens. If you want something with a bit more range, maybe look for the 18 to 105mm lens, which is really good. And of course, then there's the what's called the Nifty 50, which is a 50mm prime lens, which is a very, very popular lens as well. And there's also a nice cheap lens at about $200 here in Australia. I'll put information on those recommendations in the links below, so you can check those out. Again, not sure on the pronunciation, but Argishti Stepanyang says, what lens to use for astrophotography? Well, with astrophotography, the problem again is that you're shooting at night time, so anything you can do to get more light into the camera is a good thing. So generally, astrophotographers tend to buy wide lenses, and they tend to buy wide lenses that also have wide or large apertures. So you're looking for something that has a lower focal range, maybe 10 to 20 or thereabouts, and something with a low f number. These lenses unfortunately can be quite expensive, but if you look around, I'm sure you can find something. On to the next one. How to shoot an awesome photo? Tell me please. Well, that's a very broad question, and my answer to that would be please check out some of my videos. I've done lots of videos covering lots of different cameras and lots of different subjects, so subscribe to this channel, keep watching the videos. So the next question comes from Boozle, who asks, when you're using continuous focus and you use back button focus, you have no beep to let you know it's focus. How do you know? So traditionally with a camera, when you press the shutter button halfway down and the camera focuses, it beeps. There's a camera mode called continuous focus that I recommend using for moving subjects. And when you're using this mode, you don't get a beep. So how do you know the camera's focused? Firstly, I'd say trust your eyes. If you're looking through the viewfinder and your subject looks sharp, it's probably sharp, but actually better than that, if you've got a Nikon camera, and I don't know what camera you're using here, a Nikon camera has a little dot that appears in the viewfinder, bottom left. If it's flickering, it's focusing. If it's solid, it's focused. If you've got a Canon camera and you're looking through the viewfinder, when you press the shutter button halfway down, if you get a little dot in the right-hand corner, it's in focus. Again, if it's flickering, it means it's finding focus. So the little dot, which is displayed in the viewfinder on most cameras, is basically the visual equivalent of the beep. So I hope that helps. Now for the next question, I apologize for not attempting to pronounce your name. I'm just going to call you MKB, but you've got a question asking how to take freeze motion photography. So I guess what you're doing is you're taking a photo of something that's moving fast and you want to freeze the action so you get a nice sharp image. You don't tell me anything about what camera you're using or what specifically you're photographing. So look, if you're photographing moving subjects, so let's talk sports for example, you want to use a fast shutter speed, and the easiest way to do that is to dial in a fast shutter speed using the shutter priority mode. This is a good one for beginners. On the top of your camera, I mentioned it earlier in the video, there's a dial. S or TV will do this. Then all you've got to do is adjust the dial into the right to select a faster shutter speed. And because the shutter is opening and closing really fast, I'm hoping that you're doing this outdoors in good light, because fast shutter speeds need a lot of light to make it really work. Anyway, I hope you get on okay with that one. Moving on to the next question. Lindsay Aram has a very simple question. Best intermediate DSLR? Well, if you're looking for an entry-level camera, I'm still putting people onto the Nikon D4400. But by intermediate, if you mean something with maybe a few more functions, I'm going to steer you towards a Canon camera. The Canon 200D Mark II, or known in the US as the Rebel SL3, is an amazing little camera. Great for taking still images, great video functionality. I did a full review on it a few months ago. It's a great camera. Check out the video, you'll find the link below. That's my pick. On to the next question. So Photo Formulas asks, what qualifications do I need to be a professional photographer? And this might sound like a strange answer, but actually I don't think you need any qualifications as such. I think your work, your photos should speak for themselves. I've been taking photos for many, many years, and I've done lots of different photography jobs, and people have booked me off of the quality of my work. That's it. No one's ever said, what certificate do you have? What qualifications do you have? They book you off the quality of your work. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't seek, learning the trade via going to university or college or doing an online course or just watching videos from my channel. Learning is great, and that's absolutely essential. And you need a professional approach as well, and a nice website to showcase your work. But no one's going to book you and ask to see a piece of paper. So to be fair, I don't think you actually need the qualifications, you need the skills. Now, Barrett Ozturk, hope I pronounced that right, asks, do you think the EOS 3000V film body worthy and good for starting photography? So if you don't know it, the Canon 300V is actually a film camera, not a digital camera. Is it good for starting photography? Absolutely, why not? I started with film cameras many, many years ago, and it was many years before I actually got a digital camera, and I learned heaps. It's probably not the way that most people would go now, because it's much more convenient to shoot with digital because you get to see the results straight away. But I don't want to discourage you from this one. Film, you can still buy it. You can still use film cameras. You can still get film processed. So if you want to go down the film route first, fantastic, and I applaud you for doing it. Okay, next one comes from Kix M, who says, hi there, I have a Nikon D4400 and would like to upgrade, but has to be Nikon as I've got a few lenses already. What do you suggest? Okay, so look, you've got the Nikon D3400. That has been replaced by the Nikon D3500, but that's not really an upgrade. That camera has just replaced the D3400 that was before it. To be honest, if you're looking for a decent upgrade, I would really seriously look at the D7500. 51 autofocus points, 4K video if you want to do video, Wi-Fi connectivity, touchscreen are just a few of the features that you will get to love. It's a bigger bodied camera as well, and it's definitely worth checking out. So I think that would be a good upgrade. The Nikon D7500 is my choice for you. Sarah Lucas asks, do you have any suggestions for good Canon lenses for newborn portrait photography? Cheap alternatives as well. Well, there's only one in mind here, and it's the 50mm f1.8 lens, also known as the Nifty 50. So this is the Canon 50mm STM f1.8 prime lens. Now, a prime lens is very different to a zoom lens because it's not adjustable. So you can't zoom with a prime lens. It's a fixed focal length, and this one is fixed at 50mm. But what it lacks in zoom, it more than makes up for in aperture. Maximum aperture on this is f1.8, which is nice and wide, meaning it's great in low light, but probably the reason why most people buy it as well, it's great for blowing backgrounds. So great for portraits, great for newborns, a really good value for money lens. And what I mean by value for money, here in Australia, you can pick this up for less than $200. Now, you do say in your question there, cheaper alternatives as well. Well, there is a Chinese version of this lens, a copy in other words. I've done a video comparing this with the Chinese copy. I'll put a link in the description below. But to be honest, I would get the Canon one. It's great value for money, very popular lens, also known as the Nifty 50. So you should check that one out. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I have attempted to answer as many questions as possible, but with so many questions, this video is just getting longer and longer and longer. So I'm going to call it a day there. So if your question was not answered in this video, just head back to my YouTube page. I'll be replying to everybody individually over the next couple of days. If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget you can leave questions, comments, or suggestions down below. I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya. Bye.